Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to part 2 of my pot limit Omaha adventure here on TonyBet. We've got two 25 euro tables up. We've been playing on them for about 10 minutes while I set this video up. We've got a nice little almost double up on the right hand table. We 3-bet King, King, 10, Queen, single suited, got a Queen, Jack, 7 flop with 2 diamonds, giving us an overpair, Queen blocker, an open ender, and second up flush draw. Mad had overcalled the 3-bet, Sosis had called the 3-bet having been the opener, and Mad had overcalled with the ace 10, 9, 9 single suited and got it in on flop with about a 50 big blind stack. And the reason I'm bringing that up is just to illustrate how wide people are capable of calling 3-bets on this site, and just how wide people are playing in both single raised and 3-bet spots. You know, hands like that that are calling 3-bets out of position with short stacks on a normal site, that would surprise me greatly. You know, one of the bigger sites where fields are significantly tougher. But on a site like this, it's something that I've come to realize is a bit more commonplace than perhaps I'm used to. So yeah, a nice little pickup early in the piece. Hopefully we get a few more spots like that. But unfortunately, I didn't quite have everything set up to have the cameras on when that pot took place, which is a little bit frustrating. Hopefully the replayer just illustrates how wide some people are playing. So I don't have any real reads on the players on either table. I seem to remember Tortic, but I can't for the life of me remember why I remember him, which really does illustrate why note-taking is so important, because just remembering somebody but not understanding why is completely useless. Jägermeister sat down with 15 euros and has managed to spin it up quite nicely. Just won an all in there, and he'd won one previous to me setting up. And Mad has already stacked off twice, I believe, once to me and once to somebody else while I was setting up the video. So yeah, it might be just because he is running bad, but given his overcall in the 3-bet spot, I'm inclined to be slightly less generous with my evaluation of him. But we'll see as the video goes on. Perhaps he just made a mistake and is now going to play perfect GTO pot limit Omaha. I imagine that not to be the case, but it's perfectly conceivable that could happen. Just because somebody made a bad play once does not necessarily mean they're a bad player, and as such, you know, should be respecting their games and playing to the best of your ability while also respecting what your opponent is capable of. So reasonably standard fold on the left-hand table, where truthfully not much has happened, including the time where I was just setting up. Seems to be a bit tighter, although tight is relative on this site, but it seems to be a little tighter, and a few players have come and gone, which has kind of disrupted the flow of the game, so hopefully that one picks up a little bit, but we shall see. Pretty disappointing hand on the button. Even with a limp in front, and Stosis seems to be limping a decent chunk of the time. His hand is just going to be too weak. Min raise out of position. I think we saw that in the previous video. In one such instance, it surprised me then. It's steadily beginning to surprise me less and less, just because I see it as more of a commonplace play on this site. Needless to say, if we're ISOing here, we're going to do it for pot, but it is something that would lead me to give further credence to Mad being one of the softer players on this table. And him leading on a board that really favours a calling range. It's kind of difficult to be balanced in this spot, truthfully. He's going to have to fold to raises a lot, which seems to be what's going to happen here. But it is possible. that he has an absolute monster, but seems unlikely. There's going to be so many instances where your overpairs put in horrendous spots where you have a nut flush draw and are basically getting priced off it by the turn. It just leads to really awkward SPR spots. Seems to have sat out, but hopefully he sits back in. King Queen 6-4, facing another gun open. Again, pretty disappointing hand on the left-hand table. Hopefully getting the junky hands out of the way early in this video, so the last few minutes we get a decent run of hands. Interesting flop on the left-hand table, just because middling kind of flops are going to hit the caller far more than the open raiser, and with the possible exception of the really sort of high rundowns like King Queen Jack 10, King Queen 10-9. But the majority of his range is going to be like Jack X with some broadways, maybe some overpairs, occasionally nut flushes, but it is going to hit like the calling range, which namely hands like 10-9, 8-7, that kind of stuff. So it's interesting he bet and got it through versus 2. Double City Kings, finally a decent hand, and we get limped on, which is a little disappointing, truthfully. We are going to ISO just to try and prevent the big blind from coming in and trying to get this hand heads up. I would much prefer being in position, I'd much prefer being able to 3-bet it, but we will deal with the situation that is presented to us. Pretty much the exact situation I was just talking about how it definitely favours the caller rather than the raiser. I do have a gut shot, I do have a backdoor flush draw. We are going to check call 1, that's unusual. I have to imagine he's bet most of his 10x on this flop. It's not always the case, but it is a general theme. Does call. So I have two choices here. I can either check and evaluate what our opponent does on the river, or I can block a bet. I think I favour the block a bet here. I mean, occasionally I'm getting called by a weak 10x, which is certainly plausible. But I'm basically just trying to prevent myself from facing a pot size bet on river in a spot where my opponent has an enormous range advantage. My line does look somewhat like 10x, which is going to be somewhat difficult for me to fold on a check-check flop, although it's certainly possible. But it's a bit of a mixed play there, which I'm fine with running once in a while. Ace Queen Jack 5, we're just going to overcall. Prefer that this was suited to the ace, but given the loose nature of the game, we are going to peel, especially in position. But it is a little weak for the 3-bet. Flopping average, truthfully. Lemming betting into 2 people on a spot like this is somewhat concerning. It's more concerning as to what we do on turns, truthfully. We do have a backdoor flush draw, we do have a gut shot, we have middle pair, but none of it's particularly strong. If we had the king with the ace jack and the backdoor clubs, we would be calling, but the queen is just a little light. Difference between top pair and middle pair there is pretty significant. And Lemming got a good turn card there, less so for the fact he has 4 in his range. It's more that all draws miss. He can have the king queen, he can have 3 kings, he can have 3 queens. He can have aces that are suddenly benefiting from the counterfeit pair. So the only way that Strain can, I hope I've said that right, can really defend is the times he's at the top of range. The top of range is namely a 4, so he's going to have to fold a lot on that turn, is the point I'm trying to make. So it's a pretty good card for Lemming. And it's certainly a card we would have had to fold as well with our queen and gut shot if we had come along. And again, it would have been far more tempting to come along if we were closing action, but when we're not, it means we have to play that much tighter. Left-hand table, 3 Broadway singles suited. We are going to be opening. Granted, there is a dangler, but it's connected enough to be an open. Johnny is playing both tables, but I'm unsure as to how good he is. I don't think I've ever played him before. If I have, it wasn't especially memorable, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't tend to remember like good to average players. Apologies while that popped up. I tend to just remember the very good and the very bad, which I guess is a general thing for poker players. And the fact that there are no HUDs on this site also means that sort of note-taking, etc. is very important. So if I don't remember somebody, it's, again, not necessarily a bad thing from their point of view. Yeah, apologies for that popping up. My computer repeatedly tells me that something is plugged in and out of an audio jack while I do exactly nothing, and no amount of trying to fix that has solved it in the last 2 months, so I'm just learning to live with it. As frustrating as it is, so my apologies for that. But given I am recording, its appearance was unfortunately predictable. Junky hand on the right-hand table, where we seem to have dried up in terms of hands, but we are sitting on a decent profit, so I guess cannot be too greedy. Trashy hand on the left-hand table. Again, there's considerably less incentive in pot live in Omaha versus Hold'em to sort of 3-bet light, just because our opponent's always going to get 2-1, and especially in a format like this where players are playing particularly loose and really aren't going to be folding too many 3-bets at all, it just essentially is making our life incredibly difficult. There is a reasonable plus point to 3-betting in terms of win rate, as long as you do it with hands that can contest a decent chunk of boards, you know, big pairs, big connected, double suited or single suited high cards. But junky hands, sort of 3-betting light and 3-bet bluffing isn't really a thing in Omaha. If people are wondering why I am not mixing in some 3-bets while I'm not getting hands, it's just really not a thing in BLO. At least not a profitable thing. Double suited hand on the right-hand table, we are going to be defending even versus the gun open. The fact that the spades are suited to the 10 rather than the 7 is also something of a consideration, but the hand's semi-connected, it has 2 suits, and with the reduced price, given I've already put 25 cents in the pot, does mean it's going to be a call. As I say that, we have a 3-bet in front, which is going to be a fold, which is a little disappointing, but when the nature of the hand changes, we have to adjust. Sigh. But yeah, overcalling 3-bets in general is going to be pretty much a losing play, hence why we didn't overcall this. Obviously, this would have been one of the very few occasions where we would have flopped fairly well, but very much playing the percentages and playing with a long-term view rather than short-term and results-orientated. So as frustrating as it is to see a spot like that, it's completely irrelevant given that the correct decision is to fold pre. What happens after that is pretty much inconsequential from my viewpoint. Another hand on the left-hand table that would be raising in later position. Again, I seem to be getting these in reasonably early position a lot. Again, the raise in front makes it very much a mute point anyway, but it is frustrating to have to play this tight, but yeah, it can happen. It would be a greater mistake to suddenly widen my range to suddenly include hands like that, which I'm not necessarily even open raising. I am calling with. In general, our cold calling range is going to be considerably tighter than our open raising range, just because we need to connect in some way, shape, or form, or get a board that we, as the caller, are going to have a greater range advantage than the raiser. And that's the reason people raise. In general, they are going to win the pot a greater percentage than they do when they call. As such, our cold calling range has to be tighter. to adjust for that. Mad mixing in another 3-bet. He does seem to be getting a little bit aggressive. I mean, granted, he is effectively down 2 buy-ins, although he's chipped up a little bit, so maybe it's more like 1.5 now. But the point is he's down and possibly is playing aggressive to try and chase his losses. Prefer the aces are suited to the hearts, but they are still aces, so c'est la vie. Naturally, if any 3-bets incoming, we're going to be 4-betting. Although this left-hand table, there really don't seem to be many 3-bets, so not so sure that's a thing. We do flop top pair, we have a blocker with a 9, we do have a backdoor flush draw. Is a flop that's going to favour the callers more than the raiser. That being said, if I check, I'm going to be losing the pot just about every time. Getting led into is kind of weird. We are somewhat forced to peel 1. Deuce is a very good card from my point of view. There are very few full house combos here. I mean, given we block the 8 as well, so we're blocking pocket 8s pretty well. It's really sort of 6s effectively. There's far more draws, you know, the 9-7, the 10-9-7, the 7-5-4. We do have a blocker to that in the form of a 9, but this is more a denial of equity / we sometimes get caught by those draws on turn anyway, so about as good a turn card as I could have seen that wasn't an ace. Or potentially an 8. But a very good turn. Again, we don't need to size pot. We're not really gaining anything by potting. Effectively, all we're doing is risking more money for a very negligible return versus half to 2/3 pot. And even 2/3, you could argue, is a bit big there. Single suited kings with a couple of connectors and an ace. Again, you're going to be 3-betting this. Especially if I have position. To be honest, there isn't really a blind versus blind dynamic here just because most hands have been raised before we get to this point. The 4-bet's interesting. We do block aces. That being said, I can't 5-bet and get money in well. He can 4-bet some wraps, which connect with this board is probably favouring me more than him. However, when he pots it, to be honest, the pot size bet is probably a mistake with just about any part of his range. But kings are just too light to defend here. He can be doing this with hands like aces or kings with hearts. I have seen a number of people play bare aces like that, where they're just effectively trying to play for stacks on flop to prevent them facing tough turn decisions, which is not necessarily a good idea, but something that seems to happen. Although a 4-bet range doesn't connect with that super well, just a naked overpair with no real backdoors isn't going to be enough in that instance. A little frustrating, but yeah, it is what it is. 5-betting pre's pretty much only ever getting called by aces. Gonna bet our top 2 backdoor flush draw and straight draw here. Added benefit is it might look slightly tilted. Pretty good turn. Again, don't really need to size up. I'm incentivized to allow hands like 10-9-8 to continue. Hands like H6 are obviously continuing anyway. Yeah. Oh well. I win a little bit anyway. There is a little bit of an argument for checking turn, but given I've let out into 4 people in a limp spot, it's reasonably unlikely that people with draws are going to suddenly start putting money in the pot when I check. My check's going to be somewhat face up. But against a weaker player, it can certainly work. I think half pot there to sort of, one, incentivize draws to continue, and 2, possibly even incentivize them to raise, perceiving me to be weak. It's probably going to be slightly plus EV versus checking. It's going to be difficult to get money off too many combos there anyway, especially from Tortic, because he has to worry about lemming behind, but it seems like a reasonable line from where I'm sitting. Double suited deuces in the big blind. Limped again. Seems to be a theme of the last 2 videos. Again, we're just going to be checking if it happens to get limped round when it's raised in front. This hand's going to play pretty poorly. We do have a nut suit, but our pair's garbage. Our straight draws are always going to be the weakest ones, and that leads to some pretty horrendous reverse implied odds. Our second flush draw is worthless, given how low it is. So effectively, I'm playing ace deuce suited, which is not exactly a great idea. Even a spot like this, where we have 2 pair, we can't improve. Can very much be behind ace king from an open raiser. There's all sorts of Broadway draws, all sorts of flush draws. So even in a spot where we flop just about as good as we can, barring flopping the nut flush, we'd still be in quite an awkward spot. Junky hand on the left-hand table. Again, if it's limp, we're just going to check through. Try and flop something akin to a miracle. And we get an ISO raise in front. Pretty reasonable fold. Pretty good hand on the right table. Needless to say, I'm going to be 3-betting this. Trying to get the hand heads up. If we do get it heads up, we're getting it heads up in position, which is going to be an added little advantage in this spot. He folds. Again, 2 pretty reasonable hands. Going to be opening on the right-hand table when folded around the cutoff. And we're going to be 3-betting here once it's folded around to the cutoff. Flopping 2 pair. We do have a backdoor flush draw. We do block some of the straight draws with that 9. And as I said before, 3-betting on the left-hand table. Opening double suited queens with the ace blocker. A little bit of a disappointing flop. That being said, I do have a good chunk of kings in my range, so it is somewhat tempting to bet and then check give up, or alternatively I can just check give up. I do think unfortunately the 6-5 is going to connect with enough of his range. Bet the flop on the left-hand table, on the right-hand table, sorry, with the intention of getting this through. Doesn't appear to have worked. Going to be check calling turn, and just giving up on the left-hand table, unfortunately. End up hitting running jacks on the right-hand table. We're going to bet it for value. pretty reasonable spot, I think. Try and get called by King X that's somewhat scared. Do get called. Sweet. 3-betting aces. Having been card dead for the last 20 minutes, all of a sudden all the hands are happening at once. What did we get called by? We got called by King 8. Seems loose, but kind of what we're targeting. We're targeting kings. I didn't think he'd go as low as King 8, but happy days when he does. Torsik apparently has a decision. If that decision's 4-bet, I'm pretty content with life. Not the greatest flop for a 3-better, truthfully. Looks like a very good candidate for a check back. 5's not terrible, actually. It does mean the straight draws he has haven't completed. There is now an argument for betting on the small side. I can have some 5s. They're not an enormous number. We can have some. Checking back also has some merit given its rainbow. We are going to check back, in fact. And I guess we'll try and get paid by a random king. Going to be folding the jacks with a 3-bet. This is a thin bet. Once he checks 3 times, the times he actually has me beat are going to be exceptionally rare. And on the right-hand table, jacks, when 3-bet and out of position, jacks just are going to suddenly appear significantly worse than they did when I first viewed them. This is not going to play well versus a 3-bet range. In general, pairs don't really play well versus 3-bet range unless they're particularly high, namely aces and kings. And jacks without an ace blocker, single suited, not especially connected. The single suitedness contains 3 of the same suit, and we're not closing action, so we're just going to mean that it's a pretty easy fold. It's an interesting flop for the kings. I can pretty much never get 3 streets here, so I actually think this is a candidate for checking back, trying to see if our opponents turn their 10s, jacks, queens into sort of value owning themselves, / occasionally opponent bluffs. It does also mean I protect myself the rare occasions I am against a 9, but it's more to attempt to extract value. Bet check bet's also a totally reasonable line, but I feel like checking flop is probably going to mean that people give me slightly less credibility when I go small on turn. Three is a pretty good river. And I'm going to size up a little bit to try and extract value off jacks, off 10s. Times we get check raised, it's essentially a 9 and nothing else. Yeah, we got 1 street. Again, our opponent's pretty much never calling a pot bet, so something around 2/3 to 3/4 seems totally reasonable. But he was wise to the ruse. Oh, we get a walk with a nice hand. Well, I guess it's uncontested, so that's a thing. Interesting 4-bet spot on the right-hand table. That hand from Tortic is a hand that has basically no right to be in a 4-bet spot, but sure. Unsurprisingly, Johnny, having 4-bet, does indeed have the aces. But yeah, that is not a good hand. I mean, granted, you are almost certain that when you hit the 2 pairs, etc., your hand is, your pair's alive, but you're going to be up against a lot of overpairs. The times you have flush draws, they can very easily be dominated. It's just overall not a good idea. But yeah, it worked out for him on this occasion, but long term is not a good plan. Decided to overlimp the ace queen 6 deuce. A little light, but I'm okay with it. Given that Mad has not ISO raised to pot, he's made it small. We're just getting such a crazy price, we're going to have to call and try and hit diamonds. 2 pair and backdoor diamonds. facing a pot size bet, however, I really have no way to improve barring the ace and the deuce immediately. Backdoors I'm thinking of less just because our opponents bet pot, and that's basically going to mean that the SPR is greatly reduced. I'm not going to get the opportunity to realize my backdoor equity. Yeah, folding is just about okay. It's tight, but okay. So I think that's going to wrap the video up. So thank you very much for watching. And until the next part, I have been Tom for PokerVIP.com.